the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate, Programme Sound.
And I just welcome you to today's first meeting of the new mandate, and I advise members that all mobile phones must be set to airplane mode and on silent or turned off. It's not sufficient to put mobiles on silent mode as they continue to interfere with Assembly recordings. The session is being recorded in video and audio and can be accessed live via on-stream either on the Assembly website or via Democracy Live. There's no one in the public gallery at present, so you don't have to worry about that bit. Agenda item 2, apologies. Apologies from Declan Kearney. No other apologies. Okay, members, moving on. Agenda item 3, declarations of interests. Can I refer members to the memo from the Kirk at pages 21 and 22 of the pack? Also, members are required to register relevant interests in the Register of Members' Interests, and the deadline for registering those interests is Thursday the 9th of June. In addition to this requirement, Standing Order 69.5 states that a member who has A, a financial interest in any matter, or B, a relevant interest in any matter, must declare that interest before taking part in any proceedings of the Assembly relating to that matter. A proceeding of the Assembly actually includes the meetings of this committee. So can I just advise members, as this is the first meeting of the committee, members should declare any interests held by them which are relevant to the work of the committee. Does any member have any interest to declare? Okay, thank you. Just remind members, rules governing the registration and declaration of interests are contained in the Code of Conduct and Guide of Rules relating to the conduct of members, and that further advice and guidance is available from the Clerk of Standards in room 243 in Parliament Buildings. Members, moving on then, agenda item 4, committee membership. Can I ask members to note the committee membership details as listed at page 24 of your pack? Just I think it tells you who you all are. Agenda item 5 is in staff contact details, and I ask members to note the staff contact details at page 26. Members, agenda item 6 is the introduction procedures. Can I refer members to the following documents which are for noting? There's a guide to the powers and operation of a standing committee for chairpersons and members at pages 28 to 41 of your pack, and a guide for members on the role and functions of a committee office at pages 42 and 43. Present at pages 44 to 49 is the guide on the role of the Public Accounts Committee. Are members content to note?
Yeah.
Thank you. Members, agenda item 7, Treasury Officer of Accounts First Day Brief. Okay, sorry, our TOA actually isn't here yet, so we'll move to agenda item 8, which is the Northern Ireland Audit First Day Brief. Can I refer members to the papers from the Audit Office at pages 267 to 284 of the pack? And can I welcome Kieran Donnelly, the Controller and Auditor General, Mr Eddie Bradley, the Assistant Auditor General, and Ms Kerry Harkin, Assembly Liaison Officer. Hey folks, you're very welcome. Kieran, good to see you again. Can I just hand over to you?
Well, thank you very much, Chair. It's great to be back with a brand new committee. I'll probably start just with some basics just about ourselves and the Audit Office, and give you a flavour of what we do. I've been in this post about 7 years. I'm in public audit half a lifetime, 30 years. I'm an accountant by trade. I'm also a history graduate, and that's very topical at the moment.
Not go there, Kieran.
Yeah. But I became an accountant as an afterthought. Most of our staff, or the majority of the staff, are accountants by trade. Kerry is also an accountant. Eddie on the right is an economist.
It's an accountant without the brains.
So, what's public audit all about? When I started out years ago in public audit, I think the first thing that was drummed into us was the importance of auditor independence. That the auditor has to be independent from the entities being audited. So in the world of both public audit and private audit, there are lots of safeguards to protect the independence of the auditor. And in the context of, say, public audit, I am an officer of this assembly, and that's in statute. Sometimes a man in the street will ask me, do you work for the finance minister? And I said, no. Public audit is firmly anchored in the legislative arm of the system, not on the executive arm, and that's the same throughout these islands. That's important constitutionally. There are particular safeguards in that. In other words, our budget is determined by a separate audit committee of this assembly rather than the Department of Finance. Way back in the day, about 25 years ago, we used to be civil servants, but there was legislation brought in the 1980s ready to copper fasten our independence. So that's just by way of background. What do we actually do? The main job is to certify the accounts of almost all public sector bodies, and that will include the accounts of government departments, pension fund accounts, health service, health trust accounts. We also have an arm that does local government audit as well. So in a sense we're a one-stop audit shop for the public sector. Is there anything that we don't audit in the public sector? There are a couple of exceptions where there's with our commercial operations like Northern Ireland Water and the Northern Ireland Transport Company. But even there we would have access rights and on occasion we would exercise those rights. What comes out of the audit? Well, every year I will put a certificate on the accounts. The certificate is addressed to this House, to the Assembly. That's analogous to the private sector where the certificate will be addressed to the shareholder. So I suppose you're, in a sense, you're the equivalent of the shareholder. So we're reporting on the executive to the Assembly. Now, most of the accounts would have clean opinions, but on occasion I may qualify an opinion or I may report on a set of accounts. And where there's maybe a serious problem with the accounts, the report will come to you in the Public Accounts Committee. So in terms of the work plan, we have probably about 150 accounts across the system. That's down a bit with the rationalisation of government. But in any particular year there'll be probably about 10 qualifications, one or two serious ones. The serious ones will come to this committee. So that's one wing of the work, and that really ties up probably 60–70% of our staff. And so that's our bread and butter. That's the main thing. And if there are issues in those accounts that are maybe not sufficiently major to take to this committee, they would be dealt with by the audit committees of the bodies concerned. So, for example, if we take Department of Infrastructure, it would have its own audit committee composed of non-executives. My staff would report findings to there as well. So I would see Public Accounts Committee as the mother of audit committees dealing with the big issues. We also have a public reporting arm, and we have statutory powers to do value for money investigations, and Eddie on my right leads that part of the operation. And the reports we do cut right across government. You may ask, sometimes we were asked, what drives that programme? A number of factors would be, well, the first point is we'll work within the grain of the programme for government and the priorities within that programme. So, for example, in our current programme we would have topics in on special educational needs, access to finance for small businesses. So there'll always be a number of topics that are right within the grain for the programme of government, and we'll adjust that as the programme for government changes with a new mandate. That said, sometimes there are less attractive areas that are not almost sexy or high profile that are important to look at from time to time, and it's the bits of government that are neglected don't get airtime with senior public servants. So from time to time we dip into some of those areas as well. And I'm thinking of one in the last mandate that we looked at, funds in court, looking after investments for minors and people that can't look after their own affairs. That was a very productive sort of report and session. So on occasions we'll dip into areas that nobody else is actually looking at. So that's one thing. The austerity agenda also drives what we do. We'll be looking for as a government where there's scope for efficiency, scope for raising more income, scope for more efficiency and productivity. In the last mandate, one area that we looked at was on the agri-food development services, where we thought there was lots of potential to get more efficient operations. Also, when we do value for money work, we're not just looking at efficiency, we're also looking at effectiveness, we're looking at customer service. And in that vein, one of the things we hope to look at in this mandate is the whole digital transformation projects, customer service, how are we meeting the needs of citizens. And with that in mind, I think one thing I would say is the intelligence you as MLAs pick up in your mailbags, that's very important to us, and that intelligence can feed into our programme. So if out in the constituency you're seeing problems in certain public services, tell us, because there may be a generic issue right across government that needs looked at. And in fact, some of the topics we did look at in the last mandate, the source of the ideas came from yourselves, from your constituency mailbags. So that's effectiveness audit. The other big driver in what we do is looking at sort of joined up issues across government, because a lot of the big social problems we have today, they're not, you can't solve them within the functional silos. So if you take things like youth reoffending, it can't be solved in just looking at the Justice Department. There's a health dimension, an education dimension. So we're always keen to look at topics right across the system. One we have in our programme at the moment is on flooding, which in the main is with the new Department of Infrastructure, but other parties are involved as well, local authorities. So good joined up government is something we're very interested in. Sometimes it's said of auditors, yes, they're critics and we're always looking at things that go wrong, but that's not always the case. A big dimension of our work is the identification of good practice across government, and we're in a privileged position because we have a bird's eye view of how government is run. We can see what works well, and over the past couple of years we've been doing a series of good practice pieces, all sorts of interesting things like how to handle conflicts of interest, risk management, to name a couple. Whistleblowing is another one. And looking ahead, one we're working on at the minute is board effectiveness out in Quango land. And, some boards work well, some don't. So we're drawing up a good practice piece on that. And as part of that work, for example, we had about a focus group of 20 board chairs in the office a couple of weeks ago to try and pull out and distill some good practice elements. We also intend to do a good practice piece on performance measurement in the public sector, which is very germane to the new programme for government. Counter fraud's another dimension to our work. It's not our job, I suppose, to detect fraud, but I would see my role and the role of my staff to promote a strong counter fraud culture right across the entire public service. So last year we produced a good practice guide on that. So we're into fraud prevention, fraud deterrent, and the use of computer technology to actually pick up fraud. We participate in what's known as the National Fraud Initiative, and that has yielded savings over 30 million over the past 4 or 5 years. So that's another initiative we're involved in. I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavour of what we do, and we're more than happy then to to give you individual briefs or whatever you wish if you want to probe into any particular aspect of what we do.
Okay,
So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kieran. There's a couple of members have indicated. Kieran, can I ask, you said you look into areas that nobody else looks at. What drives those areas, or what highlights those areas for you to go looking at them?
Well, maybe we'd think of one like funds in court. Usually the intelligence will come from the financial audit, because our people, they'll be the eyes and ears of what we do. And let's say if maybe there's antiquated systems nobody's looked at for a long time, we might say, well, there may be merit in bringing some of this out publicly in a public report. So it's usually the eyes and ears of the financial auditors on the ground, or the fact maybe there's inertia, or maybe reforms haven't moved in a particular area because senior civil servants are too busy elsewhere.
Historic areas then, or historic investigations, do you take those into considerations, or is it only in the last set, if there's a set of qualified accounts, do you see that as being clean done?
No, occasionally we do get into historical issues, usually where maybe there's, say, fraud or impropriety, where as opposed to value for money, where we'd say there's no time limit maybe on how far you go back if there is serious wrongdoing. So, for example, in the last mandate, we produced a report on the Northern Ireland Events Company, and that saga goes back 8 or 9 years, but we felt it was important to close the book on it. And also, even at this remove, there were quite a lot of lessons emerging from the saga that would read across to the wider public sector. So there are occasions where we need to dip into historical stuff, particularly in circumstances where we're not investigators, but where there have been long-running investigations. We would be the conduit to bring the results out publicly.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. Michelle?
First of all, can I say that I'm delighted to be on the Public Accounts Committee. It's my first time serving on it, and I'm looking forward, Kieran, to working with you and your team. I can't stay. I have another 2 meetings after this, and I can't stay, so I feel really bad in the first meeting having to slide on, but I do apologise in advance. Can I ask you, in terms of just when you were talking, Kieran, about some of the areas that would be of concern, as a rural dweller, one of the things that is a constant bugbear to rural people is the access to broadband, to any kind of, and I wonder, has your office looked into that, because it does seem to now be coming into where, you know, urban areas are getting faster and faster. We're not much better than dial-up in some areas, and I wonder, have you ever looked at that and looked at the inequality that exists within the 6 counties in terms of provision to and access to broadband services?
No, we haven't looked at that specifically, though we did have a report in the last mandate on a cross-border project to speed up broadband, where there were managerial and propriety issues with the particular project.
Okay.
But that wasn't to do with access. That said, in general terms, I suppose access to public services is always something that we can take into account in our programme.
Well, if I'm allowed a supplementary, I think it is, given the amount of public money that has gone into it. I've, in a previous life as Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, invested 2 million in rural broadband, trying to fill the gaps and get to those hard to reach places. Considerable amounts of money have been spent over the past 10 years, yet there's nearly an acceptance within those bodies that have received public money that you're outside of the availability, and suck it up is nearly the attitude you get from some of them. So it might be an area that we might want to discuss as part of the future work programme of the committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Michelle. Trevor?
Thanks, Chair. In your role as auditor for government departments and arm's length bodies, can you interfere in a situation where, let's say, an arm's length body hasn't actually produced accounts for a number of years? as opposed to auditing what they have produced?
Absolutely. I hope there aren't any in the system. One thing the public sector has got better at is actually producing accounts on time. And we had a bit of a blitz on what I call backlog accounts a couple of years ago. And at the last port of call, there were very few bodies with in serious backlog. Now, a number of years ago, there was an initiative to actually speed up the production and audit of public sector accounts to mirror the private sector. So if you're a listed company, you have to have your accounts done and dusted within 3 months of year end. We're not too far off that mark in central government. So the main resource accounts, that's the big accounts, they close down. The year ends 31st of March. Those will be audited and laid in front of the Assembly before the summer recess. So the target is to get those accounts audited by the summer recess. By and large, that target is met. Occasionally, I might have a report on a set of accounts that I will take a decision. I need to report publicly, and it may take a little bit longer. But by and large, the system is pretty good at producing accounts on time. There may be the odd exception here and there, but it's something we'd definitely focus on if there was a problem.
Yeah.
And bring out publicly if necessary.
That's right, Chair. I'm not thinking of the big ones. In the past, there has been some smaller ones who
Yes.
got well behind, but from what you say, you've encouraged them to accelerate their process.
Yeah, there'd be a small number, be single figures, but it is something we'd be very alive to.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Oliver.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation so far. When you talked earlier on there's lessons to be learned from some of these programs or your investigations. How do you monitor those lessons that you talk about to be learned from? How do we look at that, and how do we look at that ongoing?
Okay. Well, really, this is something that has moved on leaps and bounds since devolution. I would say back to the days of direct rule, the tracking of lessons and recommendations would have been weak. Your predecessors in this committee, I think, have done really excellent work at track and implementation of recommendations. So, for example, after you produce a report, Lucia will sometime a year, 12 months afterwards, would write out to the department looking at an update. And we will also go back in to check implementation. So one of the first topics we're suggesting in front of you is one on legal aid. That's follow-up from a previous report we did in 2011. And I suppose one of the reasons we're pulling it back out, we don't think there's sufficient traction on the original recommendations. So the recommendations both in our report and the committee's report, and I think by and large about well over 90% of those recommendations are accepted. And I think when the Treasury Officer of Accounts talks to you, you know about the processes that exist in government to implement those. So that's a system that has got better. But signing up to a recommendation is only the first step. The second step is actually the implementation on the ground. So often bodies will sign up to the recommendation, but when you actually go out into the field, you find maybe the implementation is a bit patchy. So we have to come back in again and do a second run. Often where we have difficult reports or difficult issues, sometimes you need a couple of goes at it to actually get traction. But that's an area that has improved, and it's an area that's really important to make sure recommendations are implemented. I think it's also fair to say sometimes if there's a thorny problem and the recommendations may have been on the surface implemented, but the problem is still there. And that's one we'll have to be alive to as well, that the recommendations didn't actually solve whatever the problem was. But it's a really important area to actually have traction on reports, and for the committee then to revisit topics maybe that have been looked at in the past. to make sure that progress has been made.
Okay.
Through the Chair. I'm thinking of the Rural Needs Bill, for example, that was came in the last mandate there, and as Michelle mentioned there, broadband. There's a lot of content in that Rural Needs Bill. How can you follow up on that to make sure that those bodies, whatever, within the Rural Needs Bill are implementing the process that they have to implement?
We wouldn't automatically, Chair, be entered that unless we had a specific topic to look at that, or in other words, if there were pointers that there was a problem on implementation. So I suppose we can't be around every part of government all the time, but let's say if there was prima facie evidence that there was a problem of implementation, absolutely we could go in and check that. There's one important caveat I think I should say. The one thing I am precluded from doing is questioning the merits of policy objectives. So it's a long-standing convention, and it's not just a convention, it's actually in the legislation that the Audit Office doesn't question policy. So that's the only restriction on what I can do.
Okay, thank you.
Gordon?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. Would it be true to say that audit in itself can be an expensive process? And as a result, organisations and government departments have moved away from full audit programmes to more risk-based audit. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, of course, audits can be expensive, and I think it's a really good question, because I think it's absolutely crucial that audit is done in a proportionate way. And it's not just we're the top tier of audit, but every public body will also have an internal audit.
Yeah.
And it's really important then when we look at, say, public body, that we don't duplicate what an internal audit is doing. We make an assessment of their work. There will also be units, grant inspection units, so we place reliance on their work. And the general drift, I think, is to less detailed testing of transactions and more risk-based, so you home in where the risks are. All that is built on, there's one downside to that. If the risk assessment is based on dodgy foundations, so let's say a grant inspection team gets a wrong call on a risk assessment, an internal audit relies on them, an external audit relies on them. So the foundations of the risk assessment and the judgments on the risk assessment need to be really good if we're going to rely on it. So, which then takes us to the story of good quality risk management. I think that's so important. That's an area we also produced a good practice guide on it. So, risk-based approaches do make sense, help to cut down the cost and the overhead of audit, but it's really, really important that the judgments on risks are soundly based.
Okay, and just on internal audit, do you find that in the main they are efficient and effective, or is there a lot of people just going through the processes, and the issue of independence is always one that we would question?
Oh, a lot of points there. The first point I would say, just on the internal audit community, it isn't a one-size-fits-all. There's some excellent internal audit units in the public service. There are also weak ones. There's also an issue of critical mass. Some of the smaller units don't have the mix of skills to do, for example, fraud investigations or specialist work. There has been a move to bring together internal audit teams into bigger entities. So, for example, the health service is a shared service arrangement, and that's one that works quite well. In the civil service, the tradition was every department had its own internal audit team. Last year, in response to recommendations from this committee, there was a centralised fraud unit created for the more specialist work, and that makes sense. So you need specialist skills, and if the entity is too small, sometimes they can't do that. Independence is hugely, hugely important in internal audit. And it's not just in the public sector, it's also in the private sector. We've seen in the banking sector where independence has been questioned. And internal audit works, in my view, works very well if there are problems around the bottom of an organisation. But if you have problems around the top of an organisation, and say if there's wrongdoing or something improper at senior level, it takes a very courageous head of internal audit to actually deal with that. And I think that's where we in the audit office then would have to be very supportive of that internal audit community. So if you're looking at a head of internal audit, I think the personal qualities are sometimes more important than the technical qualities that sometimes will tackle a heavy issue with people that are more senior than them. So that's where internal audit, where I've seen fall down usually, is where there's an issue, a difficult issue with senior people. And that's maybe the weakness. Now, what's supposed to help there is the checks and balances, where you would have an independent audit committee and a strong audit committee chair, a non-exec. And I think it's fair to say in the last, say, 5 or 6 years, audit committees and the independent have strengthened over most of the public sector. Not universally, there are weak spots. But really, where there are big issues picked up by the internal auditor, having a strong independent chair, I think, is key in that sort of environment.
Yeah.
Does that answer you?
That's grand. Just the last point, Chair, is the non-compliance is the point that's been made where issues are found. I take it you have the authority to ensure that they're implemented and closed out to stop recurrence?
Well, authority is influence rather than authority. In these islands, there's no tradition, apart from local government, of, say, things like financial penalties. You had local government, you had still in the statute book, surcharges, things like that. In central government, it's more by influence. That said, let's say it was a Quango, and my financial audit team have been a number of repeat points, right? And we categorise the audit points into high priority, medium and low. So let's say there's half a dozen category 1 points that haven't accepted. We're into year 2 and they still haven't accepted them. Well then, that's where I might escalate something up to this committee. I've done that in the past. So that's the sanction, and nobody likes to appear in front of this committee.
That's the ultimate sanction, is it?
That's the and
Great, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Members, are you all right?
I'm okay.
Karen, Eddie, Karen, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with you very shortly.
I look forward to working with all of you. Yeah, thank you.
Chairman, just,
Sorry,
can I ask? It's not direct. It's something that Kieran has said. I just want to tease the question now. You talked about the statute books. Are still surcharges still on the statute books for councillors?
Yes.
Can I ask you, in the case of a scenario where a legacy council made a decision before the merger, does that actually come across in terms of the councillors who made that decision, in terms of surcharge?
I couldn't give you a top of the head answer to that.
okay.
I'll refer the question to have a separate head of local government audit, which I didn't mention earlier, who's Louise Mason. And we do try and keep local government audits separate from central government, so local government will not come anywhere near this committee. So it's dealt with separately. So there are very particular rules around surcharging, but I'll pass the question back. And back to you.
That's not really me. I'm on the council anymore.
That said, what I would say is surcharging is off the statute books in every other jurisdiction. There's still a legacy issue here.
Okay, members. Karen, we'll hear from you before we finish in the forward work programme. Is that all right? Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, members, moving on back then to agenda item 7 is our Treasury Officer of Accounts first day brief. I'll just refer members to your pack, pages 51 to 265. Okay, can I just welcome Miss Alison Caldwell, the Treasury Officer of Accounts, and Mrs Julie Sewell, and invite them to brief the committee on their role and put the papers into some context. Alison, Julie, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your invitation to come today before the committee and to brief the committee. If the committee is content, what I would propose to do is very briefly outline what the role of the Department of Finance is, obviously previously referred to as DFP, but now very much Department of Finance. Outline a little bit about the directorate that we sit within, and especially my own division, Accountability and Financial Management Division, and outline some of the key documents that we have in the Department of Finance that are pertinent to the work of this committee, and I'm sure members will come across. Quite happy to take questions at any stage or indeed at the end. I should introduce Julie Sewell. Julie Sewell heads up one of the branches that I currently have responsibility for, and that's Public Audit and Accountability branch. And indeed, that's the branch that this committee will become most familiar with in terms of our areas of responsibility. But in terms of the Department of Finance, it's set out that the Department of Finance is there to ensure that departments use their powers only as intended, and that they spend within the levels that have been agreed for them. In terms of setting the ground rules for the administration of public funds, that is the responsibility of our department, and indeed we're accountable to this Assembly for doing so. That said, each of the heads of departments, the permanent secretaries, when they are appointed, are designated by the Treasury Officer of Accounts as an accounting officer, which I know is a term Kieran has already used. That individual has some very specific and personal responsibilities for ensuring regularity, propriety, value for money and stewardship of public funds, and for accounting to the Assembly for how those funds are spent. Within the wider directorate of which I am a part, we have two other divisions. Central Expenditure Division. Central Expenditure Division essentially leads on the budget processes and at a strategic level plans, monitors and controls that. The second division is Supply Divisions, and no doubt the committee will hear in the months to come about supply approvals, etc. They have a particular role in setting delegated levels and for approving expenditure over and above those levels, and indeed if proposals are novel or contentious or potentially repercussive. And that sort of leads me on then to our own division, Accountability and Financial Management Division, which I head up at the current time as Treasury Officer of Accounts. Essentially three branches: Government Accounts branch and Financial Reporting and Accounting branch, which sets the technical guidance for the production of resource accounts and reports. And then, as I mentioned, the branch that Julie heads up, which is Public Audit and Accountability branch. The TOA post itself apparently dates back well over a century, a Westminster position, and at that time the person in the position was responsible for giving advice on bookkeeping to departments. And in actual fact, I suppose that's still quite a key part of the role today in terms of technical accounting guidance. But it is under the signature of the Treasury Officer Accounts that all sort of governance, financial reporting and management guidance is issued to the central government departments within Northern Ireland. One of the key documents, and indeed I suppose it is the cornerstone of our guidance, is Managing Public Money Northern Ireland, which I know members have been provided with. It essentially sets out the framework for the use of public resources. It applies to departments, to agencies and to the various arm's-length public bodies. Members have been provided with the 7 key chapters, but indeed there are a lot and numerous annexes below that go to support those chapters. That document was issued in 2008 and it replaced Government Accounting Northern Ireland, which was a much more prescriptive and rules-based document. Managing Public Money is more a principles-based document, setting out the general principles of how resources should be utilised and accounted for, and it does, I think, give a little bit more flexibility. Under Managing Public Money, we then issue additional supplementary guidance by way of what we refer to as DAO or FD letters, those being Dear Accounting Officer letters or Finance Director letters. And it's really a judgment call depending on what it is we want to communicate, whether we go for a DAO or an FD letter. They can range from anything from governance statements to remuneration reports to whistleblowing arrangements. Another document which we provide to accounting officer and which is a good source of information in terms of the principles of regularity, propriety and value for money is the regularity guide, which again members have been provided with. When accounting officers are appointed, that guide is provided to them, and if I said it gives good examples, it probably gives bad examples or where there has been irregularity and impropriety and resources not well used, but it is a practical guide and based on practical examples. The guide then, in terms of for this committee that we refer to, is the Guide to Scrutiny of Public Expenditure. Although a Westminster document written back in 2004, this committee has generally tended to apply with the principles of that, and we would refer to it ourselves, or indeed when we're preparing for hearings. It provides some very useful background, although I would say it is written in the Westminster context. But it has been generally the reference source. 3 specific Dear Accounting Officer letters and guidance which is specific to this committee were agreed in the last number of years, or were issued in the last number of years. The first one was in relation to clearance of Northern Ireland Audit Office reports, the value for money reports that Kieran has mentioned. We worked with Kieran and his team to agree that DAO, and the reason for that was it was recognised that when reports are brought before this committee, it is very important that they are evidence-based, they're factually agreed with the department, and the department doesn't get into disputing the facts here at the committee. We also have produced guidance on producing memorandums of reply, those being the Executive's formal response to the committee's recommendations, and again we worked with the committee on that. Part of our role as Treasury Officer Accounts and Julie's role in support of that is to help ensure that departments fully and accurately and as positively as possible respond to the recommendations of this committee. While those responses will be cleared both by the Departmental Accounting Officer of the relevant department, by the relevant Minister and by the Finance Minister. I hope people who have been about maybe the last couple of years would agree with me that we think that DAO has helped departments and has reduced the need for the committee to seek further clarification or additional information on the responses that have been provided to the recommendations. And the final piece then is in relation to departments or indeed ministers making comment either on Audit Office reports or on the committee's reports. Our general principle in which we still advise departments is that there shouldn't be comment until the committee, the public audit process has been fulfilled and the committee has concluded its deliberations. However, it is recognised, as it has been in Westminster, that there may be times when a minister, etc., wants or feels it necessary if, for example, there were sensationalist headlines in the news, which he or she thought were not balanced or reflective of the position. Departments we would ask to come to us and we will discuss what they're proposing to do, but our general guidance, our general rule of thumb is don't make any comment until such times as the process is complete. So while that's the key guidance, we have lots of other guidance on our AFMD website. There are quite a number of sections, and quite often, this committee will be referring to that guidance. On a practical level, how the Treasury Officer and the Treasury Officer team work in supporting the public audit process is that we work very closely with the Northern Ireland Audit Office, obviously taking account of their independence, and also with the PAC staff. And that's to ensure that the process runs smoothly, both for our departments and also for the Audit Office and for the committee. We're involved in all of the sort of stages of the process, right through from when the CNAG starts his value for money reports, the various versions of that, as that is cleared with the relevant department, liaising with the committee in terms of ensuring that witnesses know when the hearings are going to be and that are prepared and supported for those, producing the memorandum of reply, and indeed if there is any follow-up correspondence required in relation to that, that would be channeled through myself with the relevant departments. And that really just gives a summary of what our role and purpose and the contribution we hope we make to the public audit process is.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Alison, any, I suppose, challenges or difficulties you've faced in the restructuring in the departments and how your operations have been?
Not directly involved in the restructuring of departments, although there was a project board established and various work streams coming out of that. The piece that would affect the work that I do mostly is in terms of the financial reporting, and indeed FRAB, Financial Reporting and Accountability Branch. They have been and will be working with departments to issue guidance in terms of how we finish off the old department's accounts, and also working with the Audit Office to ensure that the new accounts for the 9 new departments are appropriate, and we will be issuing guidance on that. But so far we've had no significant challenges in that area.
When do you think that guidance will be completed, or when do you expect to close off the old department's accounts?
Well, as Kieran said, the old departments, we would hope that those accounts will be laid before the summer recess. That's the accounts produced for Kieran and his audit team to actually look at, for them to do the necessary work that is required, and then for them to be laid before the summer recess. At this point in time, we've no indication that there's any particular issues with that. Finance teams are aware, of the timetable. It's more or less the same timetable every year, just with the added complexity this year that we are obviously moving into a smaller number of departments.
Can I just out of curiosity, what size of staff do you have within your team?
Within Accountability and Financial Management Division, we have, I think it's about 17 staff. Some of those are part-time staff, though.
Right, and then can you draw then from different departments, audit teams or finance teams, if necessary, or would that?
No, we're very much actually a standalone division. In terms of Julie's side, to be honest, there's only Julie on it at the minute, and myself. We have been hit with retirements, etc. On the financial reporting side, we have three accountants, and on the government account staff, we have a number of accountants, and then admin support staff who also provide administrative backup. So there is some sort of contingency between the division. In terms then of the operational finance departments out in departments, we have our own. Within the Department of Finance, there is a finance director who has a much larger team who deal with management accounts, the resource accounts, and all the other sort of budgeting and monitoring activity that goes with that.
Okay. Members? Okay, Alison, Julie, thank you.
Thank you
very much for your time. Thank you. Members? Okay, members, moving on to agenda item 9, which is the legacy report from the previous PAC. Can I just refer members to page 285 to 313 of your pack? And that contains the committee's legacy report and highlights the work of the committee over the last mandate. Members, page 295 of the legacy report of the outgoing committee indicates some issues and priorities that this committee may wish to note for now and return to during our strategic planning day in June. Just advise members for the remaining item of businesses. Members content that we look at those legacy recommendations on our planning day. Yep. Okay, just advise members for the remaining items of the business it's necessary to move into closed session. Are members content with this arrangement?
Great.
Okay, great.